I start the first session by telling you about the new UEFA Club Licensing criterion. I know that everybody is buzzing about this new criterion. I know there are lots of questions. The point of this session and the panel session that follows is to answer as many of those questions as possible. So if I can start by just reminding us very briefly, I know most people in this room are very aware of these statistics, but it's good to take a few seconds to reflect. Something I think we often forget. We are the largest minority group. That's a very powerful statement. We are the largest minority group. And what we all know is disability doesn't discriminate. It can happen to any one of us, as we know, and as we live longer, most of us at some point are going to need improved access. At the moment, about 12 to 15% of any population is disabled. That number is rapidly growing. That's at least 840 million people in the world, a lot of people. Around 1% of people use a wheelchair in the population, so we must remove the stereotype that disability is all about wheelchair users, but at the same time we must reflect on that number because it's a large number. More than 2% of us are learning or intellectually disabled. 15% of disabled people are deaf or hard of hearing, and increasingly our population, as people grow older and live longer, become hard of hearing, often initially without realizing. This is a very overlooked topic, but very important that everybody is included. At least 285 million people in the world are partially sighted or blind. It is important to remember that a lot of people have some vision. I've often heard clubs say to me, well, we can put them here because there's no view of the pitch. Well, that's completely wrong. Most partially sighted people actually want to be close to the pitch so they can maybe view some of the game, but also hear the sound of the ball. Many disabled people have more than one disability as well, and that's an important consideration we often forget. Another area that is really overlooked is mental ill health. 25% of us, 1 in 4 of us in our lifetime will have mental ill health. It's one of those last taboos that people don't like to talk about, but it's important that we do. And 50% or more of us, as David said, have never attended a sporting event. And 2/3 of disabled people have never travelled abroad or even been on extended day trips, purely because of poor access. In the 21st century, that is completely and utterly unacceptable. We're actually worth money. People forget this. The common issue that is presented certainly to me, and I know to many of you that champion the cause around Europe and beyond, we're told this is going to cost a lot of money. We can't hide from the fact that sometimes it does cost money, but we also can't hide from the fact that collectively we are all within a game that isn't short of money. We influence the choice of our family and friends. I know if somewhere a restaurant or a bar isn't accessible, not only do I not go, but nor do my family and friends. So not only do they lose my business, they lose all that additional business. So we have to change the mindsets. People come to events like Euro 2016 speaking different languages. We have that evident today. So when information is only written in long text in one language, it doesn't serve any purpose. So international signs and symbols, of course, are important to disabled people, but to the wider population. Let's be clear. If you have an accessible stadium or venue, it's more sustainable, it's more financially viable. In most countries now, or increasingly so, it's also a legal requirement, but it's morally the right thing to do. If our clubs and football, as we know, is looking to improve reputation, there is no better way than to win positive reputation than to embrace this subject. It was a delight to hear the message from the president of UEFA saying exactly that this morning. I know you know the journey that we've been on together as CAFE, so I'm not going to repeat that journey, and I think later on Patrick from UEFA will share some of that journey with you. But what I would like to remind everybody is that at our first conference in London, we talked about and launched the new Access for All guide. This is the guide that UEFA and CAFE have pledged together as recognition of the minimum European standard. These are not numbers we've picked out of the air. These are the minimum requirements laid down by Europe. What we're asking for in the minimum is really not much. When we turn to our friends within the Olympics and Paralympics, they have much higher standards too. So don't let anybody tell you that we're being unreasonable asking for this in new and existing stadiums. We're not. And as Emmanuel had said earlier, actually we should be striving for better. The guide is available in 14 languages now, so hopefully for most people it's easy to share. You've got hard copies, most of you, in your delegates' packs. There are some languages that are only available electronically, but if you really have a need for hard copies, let me know and we'll see what we can do. So, stating the obvious, we all know this. Whenever we build a new stadium, may God forgive us if we don't get this subject right. There is no excuse. We can improve existing facilities. We have proved this over and over. Please don't go back to your countries and let your clubs, your federations, or anybody else tell you you can't change an existing stadium. I would challenge anybody that is dedicated to doing the right thing to not be able to make any building accessible. It is perfectly possible, but you have to have the commitment, you have to have the expertise, and occasionally you have to be prepared to spend some money. Football can do that. Our job in this is to make sure that this is at the top of the agenda. That's all of us have that responsibility. This isn't a once-only thing. This is something that has to be looked at ongoing. It's an evolving duty. So at club level, at stadium level, this should be in the business plan year on year. What can we do this year to make another improvement at this stadium? Our job is to share best practice and ideas and to motivate. It's about accessible information. The first thing a disabled person will say to you, coming to this conference, visiting a football stadium, any other thing in life, we need accurate information. If we know the challenges we face in getting somewhere, we can usually manage it. But we need proper information. So the clubs need to be putting that on their websites. We need to be sure, and we're working with Euro 16 to make sure there's information when you travel to the tournament. Of course, we've talked about the facilities, but we mustn't forget the accessible services. So we need to remember that if somebody blind or partially sighted comes to a football match to enjoy the ambience, they need audio description. You'll hear about that later on in one of the sessions. So it's about constantly grasping those opportunities. If you see a door open just ajar, be really sure you push that door open. We're all pushing that door. Please keep doing it. So what's clear from everything we've discussed here is we need champions. Everybody in this room is a champion, and I thank you for that. But we need more. What I can tell you is there's a lot of fear out there. I think it's something we all recognize. People are worried to do the wrong thing. They're worried that they may offend disabled people. They're worried it's going to cost money. They're not sure how to go about it. And the human nature often is to put it aside, to deal with the problem another day. We all do it. We do the easy bit first, and then we get to the difficult bit when there's nothing else left to be done. We have to make sure this becomes the first priority, and that's certainly my job, CAFE's job, to ensure this stays where it is, really at top level at UEFA, Euro 16, FIFA, and so on. But your jobs are to make sure you're doing the same at club level, at country level, that you're really banging that drum to keep this on the agenda. UEFA and CAFE, we've talked clearly already about that special relationship, and you believe you me, I've been at this work now for almost 10 years. I have never faced a no from UEFA. They may say to me, Joyce, you're asking too much, and I always say, but that's my job. And every time we look for a solution, we don't always find it straight away, but the commitment is there. We need that same commitment, please, from the football federations and associations, from the clubs, and then together we will get this job done very quickly. So it has to be at local level. One of the roles that CAFE performs is to really help motivate and facilitate the formation of user-led disabled supporter groups. We've been really thrilled at how this has been embraced and the increase in the numbers of disabled supporter groups at club level. We've certainly seen huge progress in Ukraine and Poland in the work we've done with our partners there. We have progress in France and in other countries. There are people coming on board and understanding why this is really important. The clubs need to speak with their disabled supporters if they're to understand what needs to change. And of course, naturally, this leads to having the need for somebody within the club that takes the responsibility for this topic, a disability access officer. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been talking together with UEFA about how this might come about. I'd like to pay a special thanks to the UEFA Club Licensing Committee, who have been dedicated to making this work. So with great joy, on the 1st of July this year, it actually became a criterion within the UEFA Club Licensing manual. Now, what that actually says is this, that every club, so a licence applicant, must have appointed a disability access officer to support the provision of inclusive, accessible facilities and services. And further, that disability access officer will regularly meet and collaborate with all of the relevant personnel on all of the related matters. And we expect that that person will have the privilege to be able to speak with the directors of the club, with everybody in between, because as we know, access has to be integrated through everything. In terms of the implementation, I'm pleased to tell you that UEFA has now commissioned CAFE to support them in the delivery of the new criterion. There are people here from some countries. I can think straight away of Germany and England and the UK to some extent, where a similar, this same role really, perhaps called a disability liaison officer, has existed already for some years. The successes are obvious, and that gave us the evidence to be able to put to the Club Licensing Committee that this works. So for those countries, we mustn't be smug that we've done it, because we haven't. It's always a work in progress. We need to be really sure that those disability access officers or disability liaison officers are doing the job well, that they're the right people to have the job. I do know of some clubs where it's a token appointment. We can't have that. That's not going to work. This has to be somebody that understands the subject, that can advise the club on local legislation, local disability and equality legislation and building regulations, on the European context, and work towards those minimum standards, at least, that are in the UEFA CAFE Access for All. In terms of the countries themselves, the national associations will have the ultimate responsibility in implementing this new criterion. And what we will expect, and some associations have already done this, is they will put a similar criterion, if not exactly the same, into their own club licensing. So I can tell you Poland were very far ahead in this. They actually implemented the criterion before UEFA published officially their criterion, and they've already appointed, and I think Mikkel is here somewhere, they've already appointed the disability access officer at the Polish FA to take responsibility for driving the project forward. Directly after this conference, CAFE will be advertising for somebody to join CAFE. It will be a job with lots of travel, but a really exciting challenge to coordinate and lead this project for us. So if you have it in mind that maybe you would like the job, or you know someone that would, please encourage them to apply. You know, we'd like as many applicants as possible. We will deliver training workshops. We will be sharing best practice. We will want to build a network where disabled access officers from around Europe can talk to one another. We will also be working closely with Supporters Direct as many of you know, they have delivered the supporter liaison officer role. In 3 years, they have established more than 1,000 supporter liaison officers, and we work closely. We have a good friendship with Supporters Direct, and we will learn from how they implemented what they did. And together, I hope, we can maybe share workshops sometimes to save money, etc., etc. I cannot emphasize enough, though, this is not a supporter liaison role. They are very different roles, and I hope, please ask questions from the floor in the next session. But let's be clear, there may be some clubs with smaller resources at lower league that have a joint supporter liaison and disability access officer. They are two very different roles, and there has to be that expertise for the disability access too. I think if you ask me to write the job spec, and we will certainly put a template job spec out for people to use, at the very top of the list, I will say we have to must be able to be a champion and to motivate and inspire, because that is the strongest element of their job. They have to be able to motivate and inspire the clubs to change. In terms of the various stakeholders within the club, the person is employed by the club. Now, in some lower league clubs with less resources, it may be the person is a volunteer or part-time, but they are actually part of the personnel of the club. They should not be a member of the committee of the disability supporters group. There will be a conflict of interest. Of course, they must have a good working relationship with the disabled supporters group, but they should not be the chair of that group, or etc. They should be two separate roles, because they will have an impossible job otherwise. Of course, a big lion's share of their work will be making sure that the stadiums and the clubs are accessible on match and non-match days for disabled fans and anybody else that requires access. We also expect that they will assist the disability football coaches in terms of advising on access, not on coaching, but on access. We need to be sure that VIPs and guests that come to events like this have an accessible and inclusive welcome, so they'll be working in that sector too. And you're going to hear a presentation later, an exciting project that one of the cafe directors has done with UEFA, the Captains of Change, to encourage national associations to employ disabled people. Now, of course, we expect that a lot of disabled access officers will naturally be disabled people. Not all. There's not an absolute requirement. Of course it isn't. Everybody needs to take responsibility for this topic. But what I want to stress here is, please let's not stereotype disabled people. We all know brilliant disabled people that are more than capable of doing any range of jobs at football clubs. So we have to change the mindset. We often talk in the wider equality about the need for more diverse leadership within football. I don't want to say too much about it, but we've all seen the current crisis within football. We are sure and we hope that we return to a place that's more sensible. But we need to see disabled people in decision-making places too, because then I think this will become even more natural, that the change will happen much quicker. So disabled people have to be able to take their rightful place at every level of football and in every aspect of football. That can't happen if a football club has an area for its staff, for its personnel, that is inaccessible, for example, to somebody in a wheelchair. So we have to change that mindset. They will also be responsible for giving disability awareness training, and so on and so on. I've talked about how already that is something that is established in UK and Germany. I really turn to those of you already doing the role. Please help us in implementing this. You know how well it works when it's done properly. We want to help other associations. UEFA has 54 member countries. And I tell you, there are countries who really want to embrace this topic. We get calls, I get phone calls all the time, but they need our help. CAFE is only a small team of people. We need your help, so please be on side for that. I've talked about championing the cause. I've probably said that too many times. But at the end of the day, our ultimate ambition, and really at speed now, because it's long overdue, is to create access for all. So without any further ado, you'll be pleased I'm going to stop talking for a little bit. I'd like to welcome on stage my dear friend and colleague in the equality championing of the game, Piara Power. He's the Executive Director of FAIR, and we are good friends. We work hard together on a lot of topics, and he's going to come and moderate for us.